I'm sure we'll all agree, and as I mentioned earlier, that this year has been a phenomenal year for women's sport in Australia, and the person who's about to get up on stage next has very much been at the forefront of making it so successful. So our Rob Rose lecturer today was born in Melbourne and grew up in a housing trust home in Ashwood in the southeast before going on to run a successful building business. She's become not only a celebrated businesswoman, but a medical research philanthropist, patron of the Western Bulldogs Football Club, and passionate women's football advocate. Susan Alberti personifies the values we celebrate in the annual Bob Rose Lecture and has been incredibly positive influence in our community through her support of the great game and her patronage of medical research. As a youngster, Susan held a weekend and school holiday job at McEwen's hardware store in Chadstone before going on to become the first female registered builder in Australia. She co-founded Dansu Constructions with her first husband, Angelo, and assumed responsibility for running the company after he passed away, taking charge of around 300 employees at that stage. Her involvement with football started as a player and avid Bulldogs fan. She has flourished as a patron after she was forced to hang up her boots at the age of 15 because there was no league for her to play in. Susan has worked hard to rectify this for future generations and was integral to the establishment of the AFL, the Women's AFL League in 2016, because we did start last year, that's right. I thought that was a typo for a second. Of course, she's now the director of the AFL Women's Advisory Group and is the AFL Women's Premiership Cup ambassador. Although this event can occasionally have an admittedly Collingwood feel to it, it's only fitting that after the 2016 AFL season that we live up to Bob's ability to transcend loyalties and host the first Bob Rose lecture with a Western Bulldogs allegiance. We're extremely proud today to host Susan, the former Vice President of the Western Bulldogs and ongoing patron of the club. And Susan, I hope you like what I'm wearing today, because this is a very, well, Murph's doing an internal review of Collingwood at the moment, so I figure if I get moved on from there, I could look the part at the Western Bulldogs. Now, Susan is one of Australia's leading medical philanthropists, and is working towards her enduring desire to find a cure for type 1 diabetes. Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation has raised over $40 million through the Walk for Cure event to raise money for research, and Susan herself has personally been involved in raising well over $100 million towards the cause, which is absolutely fantastic. Susan was awarded the Order of Australia in 1997 for her contribution to the cause of diabetes research, and an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2007 for a long and outstanding contribution to major medical research institutions, and a Companion of the Order of Australia in 2016 in recognition of her eminent service to the community, particularly through philanthropic and fundraising support for a range of medical research, education and sporting organisations. As an advocate for improved healthcare services and for the disadvantaged, and for young women as a role model and mentor. Well, that's one of the best introductions I've ever done. It's an absolute privilege to have to invite to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Susan Alberti.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for the introduction. I thought you were going to give my whole life history before I stood up. But look, I'm very, very honoured today to be here and to present to you all today. And I'm very, very privileged to have been asked to deliver the 15th annual Bob Rose Lecture. Following in the footsteps, and I was just looking at the program of many inspirational orators from both inside and outside of the football world. As someone who has devoted a large part of my life in helping others, I commend and I salute the Robert Rose Foundation in supporting people with spinal cord injuries, their families and loved ones. The work we all do to support the less fortunate than ourselves, or for those who are born with or who acquire life-altering medical difficulties, makes me very, very proud to join with you to deliver today's lecture. I'm passionate about three things in life: put my husband aside. I'm very passionate about him too. But 3 things in life: women in sport, finding a cure for type 1, and you would have heard a bit of information about that yesterday, where they've come up with a drug to stop kidney disease, which is what ultimately killed my daughter. And of course, the mighty Western Bulldogs Football Club. Thank you. Many of you would have heard me speak previously about juvenile diabetes and the chronic impact this has on our community, and certainly my family, and including the loss of my only child, Danielle, who died in about 16 years ago. She was 32 at the time. It's a disease that has a major impact on the community at large. More than 150,000 Australians live with the disease, and dozens of new cases are diagnosed every week. I just want to explain to you the difference between type 1 and type 2. I'm not here to really talk about diabetes as such, but I think it's important you know type 2 is an epidemic in this country. It is out of control. We've got nearly 2 million people with type 2 diabetes with a population of 24. And that can usually be remedied with diet, exercise, and maybe some medication to kickstart the pancreas. So that prevention is better than a cure with type 2. And I've just served on the advisory committee to the government in Canberra. And I discovered a couple of things which really shocked me. You can get Coca-Cola up to the Northern Territory in 24 hours, but to get fresh fruit and vegetables, it takes a week. So we are very fortunate living here that prevention is better than a cure. So with good diet, we can certainly eradicate type 2. Type 1 is through no fault of your own. It's a chronic autoimmune disease. Once you're diagnosed with it, it's for life. And try telling a 12-year-old, an intelligent 12-year-old, that insulin it's not a cure, it will just keep you alive. And the complications are exactly the same with type 1 and type 2, heart, kidney, etc. Although there is no correlation between fitness, playing sport and type 1 diabetes, many other lifestyle diseases and the increasing morbidity of our community means exercise, particularly for young girls and young women, is more important today than it's ever been before, which is part of the reason why I'm focusing today on women in sport and sharing with you my role in helping to establish the inaugural season of the AFLW. This story for me began 55 years ago, when I was a young girl and my brother Richard and I cheered on the red, white and blue, and I always wanted to play footy. We would go every second Saturday afternoon to the Western Whitton Oval to cheer on the mighty Footscray. I would play the odd game with the cheer squad team against the visiting cheer squad team, or even amongst ourselves, and would have done almost anything to play regular games. You probably don't realise, but I actually was a member of the cheer squad. And I think I'm the only AFL director in the whole of the league who's ever come from the cheer squad. That's my claim to fame, and also I think I'm the only vice president who's ever come from the cheer squad. So, Western Bulldogs, there you go. So I always wanted to play the game, and I was very frustrated, and I'd jump the fence after the game and run to the centre of the ground, and if I could say so, I'm pretty modest, but I was a better footballer than my brother. And I would do kick to kick with all the other boys and not my brother. But then Richard finished up being an umpire, and what do umpires know? Very little. And my father was an umpire because he was also a policeman. It was the only job he could do outside of the police force without getting permission from the Chief Commissioner. So our whole family was all about umpiring and football. But I was not allowed to, I could only play for a certain period of time, and my dad said, enough is enough. Being a policeman, they know everything, and being an umpire even more. And he said to me, you're getting knocked around far too much, you better hang up your boots. So at 15, I hung up my boots. I retired at 15. But I always wanted to play in regular competition, but it was not to be. There was no league for me to go to. But due to the norms of the day, I couldn't. And while it upset me immensely at the time, I moved on to other interests: school, work, marriage, motherhood, and of course our very successful building construction company. But playing football was always at the back of my mind. Today I want to tell you about the story of the inaugural season from my perspective of the AFLW and the blood, sweat and tears that went into finally achieving my lifelong goal for women to play at an elite level of their own. For the AFL, through persistent encouragement and more than a little prodding from myself and many, many others, the penny dropped that if we didn't bring AFLW to life, then they were facing the prospect of losing a generation of elite female athletes to other sports. And the funny thing is that by encouraging female participation at the highest level, the junior ranks are swelling and young girls wanting to emulate their new football heroes like Daisy Pearce, Erin Phillips, Katie Brennan, Meg Hutchins, who's sitting down there next to me, one of your own at Collingwood. These young women can aspire to be like these women that are now playing. But along the way, I was constantly told it was all too hard, that we wouldn't get the corporate support needed to sustain the competition, and even that the girls weren't good enough to feature on primetime TV. Well, let me tell you, the sponsors are absolutely falling over themselves. I'm getting calls all the time. At the Bulldogs, we've got wonderful sponsors. I don't think we've got enough room on our jumper or our shorts to put any more sponsors' names, but I'm sure we'll find a remedy to that or a solution to that. And it's not just the Bulldogs, it's all the clubs that are receiving these phone calls of sponsors wanting to be involved and they've never been involved with men's football before. They want to be involved with women's football. It's good business. Well, didn't we prove them all wrong? It's why I decided to financially support the VWFL a number of years ago. I was invited to go and speak at a luncheon, and I like to talk to people, and I go to places and find out who they are and what they do and what their interests are. And the women were telling me at that particular time they were on their knees, they were ready to fold, and they had no corporate support whatsoever, except they'd received a state grant that week of $4,000. And I think that would be enough to pay for my tyres and service for the year. So $4,000 was not going to go too far to keep the women up and running. So I decided there and then I would give them some financial support. But it was also why I also finally decided to support them many, many years ago. I was alerted to the appalling facilities and lack of resources our top women had to contend with in playing the game that they loved. I couldn't understand why a sport that was played and loved by so many women didn't have the recognition and support it deserved. For those of you who probably don't know, and I know the people in the football industry know this, but women's football really started about 100 years ago in 1915 when the men went to war and the women stepped up into their position. So they always say the first 100 years is the hardest. So it's only taken us 100 years. For me, 55 years, so I'm sort of young at this. So with my financial backing to the Victorian Women's Football League, they were able to fund a football operations manager, and we began the journey to where we are today. I picked up a couple of high-profile recruits along the way who shared my vision. In those early days, it was journalists like Caroline Wilson and Samantha Lane who's sitting up the back of the room. They helped drive the initial cultural change, which has now gone all the way to the top. In recent times, there's been a real culture change at head office, which brought forward the debut of the AFLW. The attitude of the AFL toward all aspects of women's role in football has changed immensely under Gillon McLachlan. I'd like to sincerely thank Gillon McLachlan and congratulate him on the leadership he has shown recently in relation to setting standards within the workplace. Far too long, the AFL has been seen as a boys' club. Gill has taken a strong stand on respect and responsibility for women and addressing violent acts on the football field, and for that I'd like to pay tribute to him. At the Western Bulldogs, I'm still very much involved with the club, even though I stepped down as Vice President earlier this year. We are proud at the club to have 50% female members. Nearly half of our cheer squad are women. And of course, we have more female board members on our board than any other AFL club. We also play a role in supporting the Victorian Women's Football League and the Development Academy at the Whitten Oval. The club played a central role in the establishment of the AFLW through the annual exhibition match we played between two all-female teams, one representing the Western Bulldogs and the Melbourne football team. And if you are a supporter of the Melbourne Football Club, you should be extremely proud, because if it wasn't for Melbourne, the Melbourne Football Club and the Western Bulldogs, we wouldn't be where we are today. They took a punt and they got behind it, and as I say, the rest is history. I think the AFL got a huge shock when more than 6,000 fans attended the first of these games, which was held as a curtain raiser to the match between the two senior teams. I did suggest that the women be the main game and the men be the curtain raiser, but that didn't go down too well with the AFL, but I'm working on it. Give me 10 years. As the rivalry and the interest grew in the games, the AFL began live streaming matches and then televising them through a partnership with Channel 7. The match played on the Saturday night last year in September was the highest rating game for the entire year. It was at that point I knew we were not just going to break the glass ceiling, but smash it into thousands of pieces. Just a few months earlier in 2017, we had the first game of the debut season of the AFL Women's League between those two powerhouses, Carlton and Collingwood. As I arrived at Princes Park on that balmy late summer evening and just observed the 25,000 strong crowd witnessing that first match between Collingwood and Carlton, I became overwhelmed with emotion at the joy of seeing a lifetime goal finally achieved. I went to the official function, but I don't go for the food, I go for the game. And most of the people went to the Carlton rooms, and of course I went down towards the Collingwood rooms for obvious reasons. And I wanted to take my place and be on my own and experience that ball being bounced. I'd waited a long time. And the tears were running down my face, and people kept coming over to me and saying, "You all right?" I was all right, just wanted them to leave me alone. So I moved to another position, and this continued. "Are you okay?" So you know where I finished up? The Collingwood cheer squad. And they left me alone, and they were very gracious in defeat. So I've been asked many times whether I thought that women would be playing in the elite competition of their own, officially sanctioned by the AFL, and be successful. I knew it could happen, but I didn't really appreciate at how quickly we would grow, and the immediate flow on numbers playing in local and junior competitions would be so rapid. We've grown from a suburban league with a few loyal spectators, some great athletes in a spirit of having a go, to a nationally televised competition with full venues, outstanding corporate support and great television ratings. If you thought the first season was exciting, well, you haven't seen anything yet. Now, instead of exporting our best female players to other codes and sports who have traditionally nurtured and, more importantly, remunerated their female participants, we are attracting a whole range of female athletes to our great game. Women like Erin Phillips, who's had so much success in women's basketball, including the WNBA and a Commonwealth Games medal. She brought unique skills and an element of grace to our great game. At the other end of the spectrum, it's really making a difference to the lives of many of the Games participants, including your own Collingwood's champion, Moana Hope, who I've developed a very close bond with. Mo is a truly inspirational young lady who has a big future ahead of her, and I'm sure many of you would have seen her and I featured on Australian Story last year. Mo is 29, has 13 brothers and sisters, one of whom she's the primary carer for. She lost her father to cancer and had to leave school at a very early age. And her mother also has a range of medical challenges. She works full-time in traffic management and trains and goes to the gym most nights just to keep herself in good nick. There's lots of stories of like Moana out there, many, many stories of our women who are working, studying, got children, and they managed to fit a minimum of 9 hours training. We've taken amateurs and turned them into professional footballers. It's absolutely incredible what these women have done and how they've achieved it in such a short space of time. So football has been a saviour for her both professionally and personally, and it brings a big smile to my face to the difference sport is making to that young lady's life. I'll just give you a little story. I was very fortunate to go up to the Gold Coast to present the Premiership Cup on behalf of the AFL. And again, that was a moment in time that'll go with me to my grave, to see that ball bounce and have a premiership match. And when the siren sounded, I was already out on the field, and the girls came over to me, both teams, and the Adelaide girls were crying. But there was one particular person in there I'd been following, Sarah Perkins, number 28, a gun forward. She'd lost 40 kilos. I know what it is to have to lose a lot of weight. And no one wanted her. She couldn't get chosen by any club. Adelaide gave her a lifeline. She was the only Victorian in the Adelaide team. And the girls came over to me crying. I'm thinking, well, because they've won the grand final. It wasn't just because of that. Yes, they were crying because of that. But everyone was saying to me, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I said to them, don't thank me. Thank you. I thank you for being patient to do this. Now, I was wearing a beautiful Carlos Alberti jacket. And by the time they'd mobbed me, and they didn't put the Gatorade on me, at least they'd left my hair alone, I had to get my jacket dry cleaned on Monday, but who cares? The point I'm trying to make is, here's Sarah Perkins and that team. She now has a premiership medal around her neck. She shared in a premiership, the first one ever for women. What a milestone that was for AFL. So if you talk about transforming people's lives through sport, they are prime examples, Mo and Sarah and others, and Meg, who's sitting down there, of what a great influence an active team-based sport like Aussie Rules can achieve. Mo's profile with the Magpies is now so big that she's even part of the latest NAB Auskick Mini Legends television advertising campaign, including the tattoos. But it's the numbers playing at the grassroots it's really very exciting. Figures released in 2016 by the AFL show total female participation soared by 25% over that 12 months, with more than almost 400,000 young girls playing the game. The number of girls playing Auskick has grown by 21%, 1,000 new community clubs, 500 new teams this year. Approximately 1 in 4, that's 27% of all people playing AFL football are women. I know of a club in the eastern suburbs that had 6 girls playing in a mixed team in the under-10s last year. In 2017, they're fielding 2 standalone all-female teams in the same age group. Now, that's real progress. I live in Mount Eliza. I became patron of the club 3 years ago. We had 1 team. We've now got 9. We've got a waiting list. And I think it's happening all over Australia. So there are now concerns there is not enough grounds to cope with the massive expansion of women's participation in Aussie Rules, which really is a problem I never envisaged 55 years ago when I jumped over the fence and ran onto the Whitten Oval to kick with my brother sometimes, mainly the other boys. As you can tell, women's sport, I'm glad he's not here today. As you can tell, women's sport is a real passion of mine and is a great way to prevent or delay the onset of morbidity and a range of lifestyle diseases, all too common in Australia. I'm so encouraged by the stories and feedback that I receive from young girls and their parents, just how excited they are to be involved in our wonderful game. So, 2017 really has been a milestone for women in AFL. 1, we've had the debut season of the AFLW, with almost 200,000 people attending the 29 matches, with a total TV audience of 5.64 million viewers. The Hawthorn Football Club has appointed its first ever female CEO, Tracy Gaudry. Women like St Kilda assistant coach and the others continue to break through glass ceilings in their respective roles. And earlier this season we saw Elaine. She umpired her first game between Essendon and West Coast. A couple of weeks ago I was in Brisbane for the Bulldogs game and I raced back to the hotel. My husband said, "What's the hurry?" He said, "You've already seen the game." I said, "Oh, I'll go and see Helene umpiring." I didn't care about the game. I couldn't even tell you what the scores were, but I wanted to watch Eleni again. She was umpiring the Gold Coast game and she did a great job. So that was my review of the game, was the umpire. She was wonderful. But none of this progress should surprise anyone. This is a sport for decades that's had women make up nearly half the paying audience, a phenomenon that is unusual for a football code anywhere in the world. And women have always been involved in football clubs as the coach, team manager, opening the canteen, running out the water, paying the club bills, and quite often the team psychologist. In this modern 21st century Australia, let us celebrate the achievement of the inaugural season of the AFLW. I can't wait for the next season to begin, and I'm not the only one. With the expansion of the competition beyond the initial 8 teams now due in 2019, there are many clubs interested in the 2 or more additional licences will be awarded very soon by the AFL. We've come a long way since my halcyon days as a rover for the Footscray Football Club's cheer squad, but the progress has been even more remarkable when you think of what has happened since I first funded a football operations manager for the women's competition. I sincerely thank all of you today for listening to me, and I hope that my story and involvement in the birth of the AFLW gives you a small amount of inspiration to never say no to pursuing your goals, no matter how difficult they seem to achieve. Congratulations to all of you on your role that you play in supporting the Robert Rose Foundation and helping out those who really need assistance. I hope that I've given you all a small sense of empowerment that you can make a difference. You can change things in this world and in your own lives if you put your mind to it. Do your best, never give in, and above all, I encourage all of you to make the opportunity of living in this great city, this great state, and the greatest country on earth. And before I step down and finish, I recall many, many years ago when the Bulldogs were on their knees, and this is now, I'm addressing this to the Collingwood Football Club. We didn't have a sponsor, and we didn't have a corporate support. We didn't have much at all. We were heading down that way. And Collingwood came on board. They gave us a sponsor. They supported it. The supporters were out there rallying for us, raising money. I have a memory of an elephant. I don't forget anything. And today I want to say to Collingwood, thank you. But in saying thank you to Collingwood, I would like to, for the Robert Rose Foundation, my way of saying thank you to Collingwood, but to the wonderful people at the Robert Rose, I'd like to give you $10,000 to your cause and to continue the wonderful work that you do. Thank you, and God bless all of you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Not only an inspiration, but obviously a very, very generous woman as well. Well, the CBD coterie it's a Collingwood coterie, so we need to get some Collingwood people up here pronto. It's had a very Western Bulldogs feel about it, but it's been fantastic. And for us Collingwood people, we know that Collingwood Football Club is the greatest football club in the world. It's true, isn't it? So I'd like to welcome to respond now Collingwood's Meg Hutchins. So Meg worked as Collingwood's Women's Football Operations Manager and supervised the recruitment and development of players, coaches and staff in the lead up to Collingwood's inaugural season for AFL Women's. Before playing a key role herself as a player. She's also one of the AFLW's best defenders and is a 6-time All-Australian player. Meg was the Eastern Devils Women's Football Club lead goal kicker between 2005 and 2008 before switching to defence, where she's played for the past 8 seasons. But I know she's been sneaking down to the forward line over the last couple of weeks and kicking some goals, because when she comes into work on Monday, that's one of the first things she tells us. Meg now works as Collingwood's Next Generation Academy liaison, and since walking in the door, she's been an absolute breath of fresh air for the Collingwood Football Club. So please welcome to the stage Meg Hutchins.
That's a hard act to follow, Susan. Excuse me right now if I do get emotional, because Susan, she's explained how much she's contributed to the women's game. And I think if it wasn't for you, Susan, I wouldn't be in this position right now. It's my honour, but also it's really quite rare that you get presented with an opportunity to publicly speak and also thank Susan Alberti for her tireless work and dedication to causes and organisations so close to her heart. As Glenn said, my name is Meg Hutchins, and I have the privilege of knowing Susan throughout my involvement with the Western Bulldogs as a player through the exhibition series from the 2013 to 2016. When I moved to the Collingwood Football Club to take on the role of the operations manager and player, I was quite nervous to tell Sue. I didn't want to upset her that I was leaving her beloved Bulldogs. Her response was, "I'm thrilled for you. Don't worry, we'll still be friends." How do I speak of Susan in such a short time frame? She is, in no uncertain terms, the godmother of women's football. What the great E.J. Whitten, Mr. Football, was and still is to the VFL and AFL, Susan is to the AFLW and to the women's football community. She really is our Mrs. Football. I'm sure she'll be mightily embarrassed that I've put her on such a pedestal, but the shoe fits just so perfectly. Only recently, I attended a primary school football carnival for schools based only in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. On one day alone, there were over 800 young girls playing football, with dreams to become the next Stephanie Chiocci, Daisy Pearce, and my good friend Sarah Perkins. There are 300 new female teams this year alone. And these numbers are just incredible. And we would not have dreamt of this only 3 years ago. I call this the AFLW effect. I've reached out and asked some prominent AFLW players to give me some words to describe Susan Alberti. A go-getter, strong, resilient, determined and giving. Sue did mention this, but they remember when she attended a Victoria Women's Football League finals function as a special guest. While speaking in the room, she spontaneously reached into her pocket and pulled out a cheque, donating a significant amount of money to the league to ensure that there was a paid position created, no longer leaving the day-to-day running of the competition to volunteers and players. There was not a dry eye in the room when she made this announcement, and her generosity enabled the league to grow so quickly. Past captain of the Western Bulldogs women's team and current Collingwood AFLW captain Stephanie Chiocci absolutely adores Sue, and she thinks that she's just a great role model for all women. She says she is extremely resilient and fights hard for what she believes in. She's had a lot of hardship in her life. However, she has continued to turn it into a positive and decided to make a difference. She is amazingly generous with her time and financially. Her desire to want to play football as a youngster, but never really having the opportunity, has driven her to assist in making it possible for so many other women now. The influence and impact Susan Alberti has had on the women's football and the people that make up our community has been profound. In fact, I could argue that if it wasn't for Susan's passion, commitment and sheer determination to make it a right, not a privilege, to play AFL football, the AFL women's competition wouldn't be flourishing as it is today. Lockout crowds, record-breaking TV audiences, historical moments, starry-eyed girls and boys watching their female football heroes. Susan Alberti played a significant part in making this happen. Her generosity gave us the backing when no one else wanted to. Her humility allowed us to feel like part of her family. Her support and presence at our matches and events made us feel like we belonged in the AFL landscape. And she gave us a strong and respected voice. Sue's dream was to play AFL football ever since she was a little girl, and a dream that many of us have and few of us get to realise. We take this opportunity to pull on an AFL jumper with pride, and we hold great, great responsibility to make sure we do Sue and many other trailblazers like her proud. So, on behalf of the women's football community, the wider AFL community, and for the room here today, from our hearts, we do say thank you for paving the way, for backing us in, for celebrating our wins, but comforting us in our losses, for lighting up the room when you walk in, and just for being you, our Sue. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you all to take this opportunity to raise your glasses in a wonderful toast to our Sue, Susan Alberti. We salute you, Sue. Thank you very much.